opening humanity in their strange calm. The galaxy didn't quite know what to make of humanity. Among the myriad species that filled the council chambers with vibrant displays of might, psychic prowess, or sheer physical enormity, humans were an anomaly. They were quiet, polite to the point of discomfort, and moved with a self-assured calm that unsettled the more instinct-driven races. No claws like the Sulkai, no venom like the Sharvan, no bio-armor or telepathic webs like the Veyron. In every measurable way, humans seemed unremarkable, small, soft beneath their fragile skin lay no hidden carapace, no reactive defense systems. They did not secrete poisons, nor did their eyes shine with kinetic fury. Their technology was competent, but not extraordinary. Their bodies were frail when compared to the granite-boned Vulari or the acid-resistant Grail. By all logic, humans should have been a footnote in the story of the galaxy. And yet they lingered at the edge of every major development, a presence too persistent to ignore. It wasn't strength that drew attention. It was that eerie calm, that stillness, that whispered of something deeper. Predators in the wild often exhibited such behavior. A deceptive placidity just before they struck with overwhelming ferocity. Most species chalked it up to Earth's history, a chaotic tapestry of collapses, wars, genocides, rebuilds, renaissances, and tragedies stacked atop one another like sediment layers in a canyon carved by blood and fire. Humans were tolerated, respected even for their adaptability, their strange sense of loyalty to dead ideals, and their reckless bravery, but never truly feared. That, as history would show, was the galaxy's gravest mistake. From the polished halls of the Galactic Council to the backwater colonies beyond the known hyperlanes, humanity was seen as manageable and oddity, sure, but not a threat. Their representatives smiled easily, laughed quickly, and made treaties without hesitation. They invested heavily in peacekeeping initiatives, often volunteering for the dirtiest diplomatic tasks, the no-win negotiations that left others exhausted. They were builders, not destroyers, at least to outside eyes. But for those who listened closely, who watched more carefully, there were signs, flashes in their eyes during tense council debates, moments when their hands seemingly relaxed, flexed, as if reaching for weapons no longer carried. And in rare instances, when someone managed to push a human too far, there was a stillness, not a shrinking back, not a defensive curl, but an awful patient stillness, as if a door had been unlocked inside them and something ancient, something monstrous was rising up to greet the world once again. Of course, such moments were rare. Most galactic species dismissed them as anecdotal exaggerations born from the uniquely violent histories of their interactions with humanity. After all, Earth had been a chaotic cauldron boiling over with self-inflicted disasters for centuries before they had ever reached the stars. Surely the humans had outgrown their savagery. Surely they had buried their worst instincts beneath layers of culture, law, and civilization. They hadn't. Those instincts were not forgotten. They were entombed, and sometimes the dead don't stay buried. The universe would soon learn a brutal truth about humans. They had not evolved away from violence. They had merely learned to wear peace like a cloak, a thin, beautiful, deceiving cloak. And deep within their bones, their blood, their very DNA, ancient songs of war still waited for the right chord to be struck. All it would take was one foolish act, one trespass into their forgotten shrines, one arrogant kick against the doors of their sleeping temples, and the gods would awaken once more. The galaxy had mistaken Earth's calm for weakness. They would not survive making that mistake twice. Disaster at Tarsus. It began the way these things often did, with greed wrapped in the thin veil of pragmatism. The Grail Dominion, ever hungry for expansion and resources, dispatched a small scout team to the Outer Rim territories. Their mission was simple: find a resource-rich system that could be quietly strip-mined, far from the meddling eyes of the Council. It was not intended to spark a war, merely to bend the rules as many powers did when they thought no one important was watching. Their search led them to a small, forgotten planet named Tarsus IV. The world was unassuming, dusty plains, thick forests, abandoned spaceports, and scattered human settlements that barely qualified as towns. The human colonists there were primitive by galactic standards. No standing military, no visible orbital defenses, just patchwork farms, cracked concrete roads, and the occasional sputtering radio broadcast playing ancient songs through broken speakers. Commander Drexy, a veteran of dozens of annexation campaigns, led the Grail incursion fleet. His experience told him this would be quick, effortless, The humans here didn't even carry visible weapons. Children ran barefoot across dry fields. Traders haggled over rusted parts in open-air markets. Dogs barked under the mid-afternoon sun, and old men dozed on rickety chairs outside crumbling taverns. Drexy barely disguised his contempt. Easy pickings, he thought. 6 Grail dropships descended like steel locusts. Their presence alone should have been enough to force compliance. Standard procedure dictated a show of force from the air, low flyovers, sonic booms, intimidating broadcasts in every known human dialect. When no response came, Drexy authorized perimeter sweeps with recon drones, expecting little resistance. But when the first team of drones vanished, he frowned. When the second wave failed to report back, he sent in a scout unit in powered armor. They too disappeared. Confusion soured into concern. Standard tactical doctrine advised a full deployment under such conditions, but Drexy, emboldened by past successes, dismissed it. "They're farmers," he growled, "not soldiers." He authorized ground deployment of infantry units to secure the settlement. The first sign that something had gone horribly wrong came 15 minutes later. Static-laced cries for help filled the command net, accompanied by feeds of nightmarish scenes. Grail soldiers torn apart with surgical precision. Armor peeled back like tinfoil. Buildings that seemed deserted sprang to life with improvised traps. Figures moved through the smoke, not charging in waves like primitives, but slipping through the chaos like ghosts, targeting command units with terrifying precision. Panic rippled through the Grail ranks. Orders devolved into shouting. Communications fractured. Drexy barked for air support. But when the dropships attempted to lift ground-based rail cannons that hadn't existed an hour ago, punched them from the sky. Within hours, Tarsus 4 fell silent. No distress beacons, no black box recoveries, no survivors. When the Dominion's battlecruiser arrived days later to investigate, it found only ruin-charred craters where ships had once landed. Twisted wreckage scattered across miles of scorched earth. The command center, once a proud Grail fortress, lay in a mangled heap, metal twisted outward as if something had detonated from within. Yet there were no signs of conventional explosives, no radiation, no thermal trails, only death. Bodies, if they could still be called that, were strewn haphazardly across the landscape. Some were missing limbs, others bore wounds that defied explanation. Armor fused into flesh, bones snapped and reshaped at impossible angles. In some places, only shadows remained, scorched outlines on stone, as if the beings had been erased from existence. No human bodies were found. Not a single one. The settlements were abandoned, stripped clean in what seemed like an organized evacuation. Yet there were no trails, no debris fields, no escape ships picked up on long-range sensors. Only a single chilling remnant remained: the word "Awaken" scratched into burnt-out Grail armor, scrawled across the sides of ruined vehicles, etched into the ground itself. The Dominion tried to suppress the incident, tried to cover it up as a catastrophic equipment failure. A freak accident, but rumors spread like wildfire. Whispers reached even the innermost halls of the Galactic Council. Rumors that humanity had awoken. Something ancient, something buried so deep inside themselves that even they had forgotten it existed. It wasn't technology that had destroyed the Grail forces. It wasn't superior firepower. It was something far older. A memory, an instinct, a force honed over countless millennia of slaughter, conquest, and survival. Something that had been sleeping. Until now, and somewhere hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and classified files, a few who still remembered, the old warnings felt the first tremors of terror. The temple door had been kicked open, and the gods were stirring. The rising revenant and Alpha awakens. Far from the scorched fields of Tarsus 4, deep beneath the crust of Earth, ancient systems long thought inert began to stir. Sealed bunkers, hidden facilities, and black sites, unacknowledged even by Earth's current governments, started blinking to life like dying stars rekindling in a vast forgotten night. Across continents, dormant programs activated silently, unnoticed by the sleeping masses above. The first to awaken was not a machine but a signal coded in pre-collapse encryption protocols so archaic that even the most advanced contemporary AIs struggled to decipher them. Revenant Protocol. A name that had not been spoken aloud in centuries, its very mention scrubbed from historical records, dismissed as paranoid relics of Earth's warring past. Underneath the ruins of what had once been Berlin, a vault sealed behind 20 meters of reinforced alloy and lead composite cracked open with a low groaning wail. Dust billowed into the stale air. Lights flickered to life in the corridors, casting long, skeletal shadows along the stone walls. At the heart of the vault, a stasis pod hissed and shuddered as internal systems rebooted, unsealing a presence that had waited in silence for far too long. Alpha, no surname, no rank, no designation beyond the one etched into his wrist. Sovereign Unit 01. He opened his eyes slowly, and the stale, recycled air tasted like a long-forgotten memory on his tongue. The stars beyond the cracked remnants of the vault's observation dome looked different, dimmer, less alive. Alpha stood barefoot on the cold stone floor, his body pale from decades in cryogenic sleep, but thrumming with latent energy. The nanites embedded deep in his veins, engineered to survive. Even the heat, death of the world, flared softly beneath his skin. Muscles coiled and flexed as systems within him rebooted. Neural linkages, combat reflex, trees subdermal, combat hardening, all aligned perfectly to a singular directive coded deep into his existence. Protect, destroy, remember. As he moved, the vault responded, ancient mechanisms recognizing his DNA. Screens flickered to life, feeding streams of outdated data directly into his consciousness. Battle reports, emergency beacons, tactical losses. Tarsus 4, words like extinction event risk and containment failure scrolled in front of his eyes. Alpha inhaled deeply, as if breathing in the weight of history itself. Above him, the revenant systems cascaded into full activation. Across the planet, individuals with no apparent ties to military installations. Ordinary men and women felt a cold ripple surge through their bloodstreams. Their ancestors had been selected long ago, bloodlines engineered and curated in secret, carrying hidden instincts dormant for generations. Now those instincts ignited. A school teacher in New Santiago who had never held a weapon in her life found herself moving with impossible precision when an accident struck her classroom. A mechanic in old Tokyo disassembled a hover engine in seconds, instinctively rerouting its power core into a makeshift weapon. When the grid collapsed, a nurse in Johannesburg applied a compression bandage with techniques she should never have known. Techniques perfected in orbital sieges long before she was born. They were awakening. But they were not yet gods, not like Alpha. Alpha stepped out into the frozen twilight of ruined Berlin, the city eerily silent under a thick blanket of ash and snow. Buildings stood like hollowed out skeletons. Cars long abandoned sat rusted and half buried. The people were gone, evacuated perhaps, or hiding. It didn't matter. The temple had been open. He was the first sentinel. Far above, satellites reactivated hidden subroutines, turning their cold eyes back toward Earth. Signals encrypted beyond current standards rippled through old relay networks once thought lost. Across Earth's crust, more vaults stirred, more sovereign units, sleeping titans, relics of an age when humanity had feared no threat, not even extinction. Yet none of them stirred quite like Alpha. He had been the template, the first successful fusion of humanity's reckless, brilliant soul with engineered perfection. And deep within him, something else stirred too. Something older than his creation. Something woven into the DNA of every human who had ever fought, bled and clawed for survival. The Song of War. Alpha tilted his head toward the east, feeling the pulse of another awakening, a force ancient beyond reckoning, long buried beneath the ice. Not human, not entirely. And somewhere deep within his mind, like a whisper carried on a battlefield wind, he heard a single word. Father. The true war had not begun at Tarsus. That was merely the knock at the door. The true war was waking. An Alpha sovereign born and revenant raised was already answering the call. The mystery of Eidolon and the whisper of Father. In the coldest reaches of Earth, where even memory seemed to freeze under layers of ancient ice, something older than humanity stirred. Beneath the endless sheets of Antarctica's glacial armor, a facility long lost to time and record cracked open. Not from the outside, but from deep within. Ice split with thunderous groans as fissures radiated outward from a single point, and a storm unseen in centuries brewed over the frozen wasteland. This place had no name on any contemporary map. No government claimed it. It had been hidden deliberately, a secret kept so well that even myths had forgotten it. Buried under kilometers of ice and deception, it had lain dormant since humanity's second collapse, when the world had teetered on the edge of annihilation. In the control room of Echo 9, a clandestine monitoring post still active by the barest margins, a lone man trembled before his instruments. Hammond, a relic himself of black-budget science, stared in horror as seismic readings spiked into impossible ranges. Power levels ones the Earth hadn't seen since the days of orbital wars screamed through frozen bedrock. Ancient warning systems blared to life, screaming words he hoped he would never hear. Project Eidolon. They had called it a myth, a Cold War paranoia project born from desperation. In truth, it was humanity's greatest folly. Not the creation of gods like the Sovereign program, but the attempt to copy one. Back when Earth's second global collapse unraveled society, they had found something buried deep beneath the ice, something not human, not alive in any conventional sense. It was neither machine nor organic being, but a grotesque blend of both an artifact of a forgotten cosmic era. Scientists in their hubris tried to understand it. They studied it, poked and prodded, mapped its impossible structure, and extracted pieces of its dormant code. They thought they could control it, shape it, use it as a blueprint for survival. But the more they studied, the more it watched them in return. Eventually terrified of their own creation, humanity buried Eidolon and sealed it away with cold silence and time. They hoped the ice would be enough. They were wrong. The first signal came without warning. A single word broadcast across every active Revenant link channel. Father. At first the word was little more than a whisper, a corrupted fragment across dying comms. But it grew strengthening with each pulse resonating in frequencies human minds barely recognized, but their bodies instinctively did. Revenant bloodlines across Earth staggered, clutching their heads as visions they had never lived flooded their minds. Old wars, lost battles, memories of violence they should not have had. On the bridge of the newly awakened Hellwake battleship, Erin Voss gasped as her HUD lit up with emergency signals across the globe. Revenant-linked individuals were succumbing to the onslaught, collapsing in streets, screaming aboard shuttles, weeping blood in shelters. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a weapon. It was a key, a trigger. Eidolon wasn't trying to kill them. It was trying to unlock them. Far below the crumbling ice, the facility split open like a dying heart. Metal structures unlike anything of Earth's design rose into the blizzard lights, flashing cold alien hues. And from the deepest chasm, something climbed out, a figure. 9 feet tall, impossibly symmetrical. Its body was too smooth, too perfect. No mouth, no nose, only eyes like twin black stars flickering with unknowable light. It moved with elegance, flexing long fingers like a maestro, preparing to conduct the apocalypse. Above it, the sky's twisted clouds warping into unnatural shapes as electricity bloomed in patterns. No natural storm would dare form. Communication towers melted into slag. Emergency satellites shattered under unseen stress. And then the being smiled, not with a face, but with the sky itself. The clouds shifted into a grotesque mockery of a human grin, stretching from horizon to horizon. Dr. Hammond, shaking uncontrollably, whispered the words he had buried deep within fear and classified documents. They said it was a myth, he choked. They said Project Eidolon was just a nightmare. He was wrong. It was real, and it was awake. Across Earth's surface, wherever Revenant agents still stood, a terrible synchronization took place. Memories flooded faster, more vivid. They saw battles not of Earth, but of alien worlds, sieges against forces unrecorded. In human history, they wielded weapons that had never been invented. They spoke languages no living race remembered. The very fabric of who they were began to unravel and reknit itself according to ancient patterns encoded in their blood. Back in Berlin, Alpha watched the sky boil with unnatural energy, the signals carving deep into the ionosphere. Around him, dormant machines stirred their systems, old but still obedient. Defense turrets twisted in place, scanning for enemies that had not yet revealed themselves. Drones rose from forgotten silos, their optics gleaming red in the ash-choked dawn. Alpha narrowed his eyes. He recognized what was happening, even if the details eluded him. Eidolon wasn't simply awakening humanity's lost memories. It was trying to overwrite them, mold them into something else, something obedient, something wrong. The true war wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about identity, about memory, and about whether humanity would remember who they truly were or be rewritten into Eidolon's twisted image. Alpha and the first battle against Eidolon. The air over Berlin had thickened, vibrating with a low hum that was felt more in the bones than the ears. Ash fell from the sky like black snow, swirling through ruins frozen in the unnatural stillness of an impending storm, denting atop a fractured rooftop. Alpha gazed upward, his black eyes reflecting the nightmare unfolding in the clouds. He felt it not just as an observer, but as something deeper, more visceral. Eidolon was not merely approaching, it was challenging. The first strike was not a weapon, but a signal. A pulse of psychic force rippled outward from the rising structure in Antarctica, hitting Berlin like a tidal wave. Alpha staggered slightly, his fists clenching reflexively. Around him, ancient systems groaned to life, auto turrets whirring old combat drones lifting from their cradles. Long-forgotten defense grids, reinitializing protocols written before the world burned. Above the ruins, the Hellwake loomed like a silent sentinel, its scanners spinning wildly, trying and failing to categorize the anomaly. Aaron Voss stood rigid on the bridge, eyes locked on the lone human form below, the one the ship's systems could barely process. Alpha was no ordinary human. Every scan returned anomalies, gravitational distortions, electromagnetic surges, quantum bleed. He was a singularity of purpose, wrapped in human skin. And now Eidolon was descending. The being stepped forward, its movements almost casual, like a god strolling through its domain. Each footfall caused the ground to tremble subtly, a reminder that it existed outside of natural laws. Its blank face turned toward Alpha, studying him with an intelligence that was neither curious nor cruel. It was clinical, as if measuring an experiment about to be dissected. Alpha took a slow breath, grounding himself. He could feel the memories stirring the instincts encoded in his blood, the dormant battle doctrines waking up like old soldiers answering a call to arms. But he didn't move yet. He waited. Eidolon raised one hand. The ground exploded beneath Alpha's feet as tendrils of dark energy lashed upward trying to ensnare him. Alpha blurred into motion, a living weapon of flesh and nanites dodging with inhuman speed. The tendrils smashed into the ruins, pulverizing stone and metal as if they were paper. Without a word, Alpha launched himself forward. The impact shook the air. Alpha struck Eidolon square in the chest, a blow that would have shattered a mountain. The being staggered back more from surprise than injury. Its body absorbed the force, deforming slightly before snapping back into perfect symmetry. It was adaptive, Alpha realized instantly. Learning adjusting. Good, because so was he. They clashed again, a blur of strikes and counters that moved faster than any eye could follow. Alpha fought with the raw, brutal efficiency encoded into him by forgotten wars. Every motion a kill stroke, every movement designed to end. But Eidolon was not merely resisting, it was evolving. It began mirroring Alpha's attacks, countering with terrifying precision. Above the Hellwake's scanners shrieked in protest. "They're moving too fast!" Voss muttered, her hands tight on the command rail. Targeting systems can't lock. She watched helplessly as two titans battled amidst the dying city, their blows sending shockwaves that toppled what little remained standing. Alpha moved like a storm given form, but Eidolon moved like inevitability. And worse, Eidolon was smiling now. If not with a mouth, then with the very shape of the sky. Alpha knew he couldn't win this fight by brute force, not alone, not yet. He needed to teach. He needed Eidolon to learn the wrong lessons. With deliberate precision, Alpha began adjusting his movements. Subtle shifts in rhythm, feints within attacks, layers of misdirection. Eidolon, ever the perfect student, absorbed it all, integrating it into its matrix. But Alpha was leading it into a trap. As their battle raged across the ruins, Alpha drew the being toward a collapsed sector where dormant defensive systems, ancient but still lethal, waited quietly beneath the rubble. A trap set centuries ago for an enemy Earth had never faced until now. At the perfect moment, Alpha feinted a stagger, drawing Eidolon close. The ancient systems awoke. Concussive minds erupted from the ground, detonating with the force of localized singularities. Rail turrets hidden beneath the debris snapped into position, firing hyper-accelerated slugs at relativistic speeds. Drones long thought dead swarmed from hidden bunkers, unleashing coordinated barrages of particle beams. For the first time, Eidolon faltered. It wasn't invincible. Alpha pressed the advantage, raining down a barrage of strikes, timed perfectly with the mechanical onslaught. He drove Eidolon back blow after blow, battering the being through the shattered walls of Berlin. But it wasn't enough. Even wounded Eidolon adapted. Its form shifted, absorbing new damage vectors, twisting its body into ever more grotesque approximations of human resilience. It lashed out with energy, strikes that leveled entire city blocks, forcing Alpha to retreat momentarily. Breathing heavily, Alpha landed atop a collapsed skyscraper, eyes locked on his enemy. He tasted blood his own and felt a deep ache in his bones where Eidolon's strikes had landed. Healing nanites raced to repair the damage, but even they were struggling. Still, he smiled, because the trap had worked. Because now Eidolon believed it understood him, and believing that would be its undoing. Above in the orbiting Hellwake, Erin Voss watched the nightmare unfold, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Alpha," she whispered across the comms link, barely daring to hope. "Can you win this?" There was a pause. Then Alpha's voice, calm and cold, cut through the static. "I'm not here to win," he said. "I'm here to remind it why it should fear us." And with that, he launched himself back into the maelstrom, a spear of defiance hurled into the heart of a forgotten god. The first battle had begun, and it would not be the last. The rise of the Revenants. The ground around Berlin trembled, not from the clash of Alpha and Eidolon alone, but from something far more profound. Beneath the scarred soil and fractured foundations, ancient systems stirred, responding to Alpha's presence like seeds long buried, finally called to bloom. They recognized him not merely as a soldier, but as the beacon, the keystone of everything they had been programmed to protect and unleash if the world ever dared to fall again. Across the continents, a ripple passed through the bloodlines, the Revenants. It began subtly, a flicker of memory in the minds of those who had lived their entire lives without knowing what slept inside them. A soldier turned farmer in the New Africa Collective dropped his tools as muscle memory guided him into a combat stance against an enemy he could not see. A surgeon in the flooded remains of old Bangkok, suturing a patient, found her hands moving with surgical precision, taught not by any school but by instincts, born of battlefield triage, centuries dead. They were waking all of them. The blood of old warriors, carefully bred and hidden through the centuries, pulsed with renewed vigor. Neural pathways dormant since birth activated, old battle doctrines unfurled in the back of their minds, like ancient banners caught in a rising wind. Above Berlin, the Hellwake scanners detected it, thousands, tens of thousands of small, but sudden biological shifts across the Earth's surface. Genetic flags long thought to be vestigial were igniting like firestorms. Erin Voss stared at the readouts, mouth dry. "They're coming." Her tactical officer breathed, voice almost reverent. Voss nodded slowly. She didn't need to ask who they were. The Revenants were returning, and they were not coming alone. From the stormy skies, drop pods, black, sleek and unmarked, pierced the atmosphere like meteors. Each pod a relic of the Sovereign projects, carried within it a fully awakened, Revenant battle-ready memory. Laden instincts sharpened to perfection. They landed with earth-shaking force around the crater where Alpha and Eidolon fought. The pods hissed open, releasing soldiers who bore no insignia, no flags, only the grim certainty of purpose. Their armor was ancient, patched together with pieces of history, fragments of old wars, technologies outlawed by terrified governments, and innovations lost to sanctioned oblivion. The first to step forward was a tall woman with a scar carved deep across her jaw, her eyes burning with a red glow. Born not of technology but of bloodline resonance, she said nothing at first, merely moving with a grace that spoke of lifetimes lived and battles fought in echoes. She knelt before Alpha, who barely glanced at her between strikes. "Permission?" she asked, her voice a low growl of restrained violence. Alpha, still locked midair with Eidolon, in a violent dance of blows and counterblows, responded without hesitation, his voice a crack of thunder. "Granted." The woman rose, and with a signal invisible to the uninitiated, the Revenants charged. They struck Eidolon like a wave of sharpened memories. No hesitation, no fear, only a brutal, coordinated fury that was older than history itself. They did not fight like contemporary soldiers with their neat formations and clean protocols. They fought like the ancient warlords of Earth, chaotic, vicious, unpredictable. Eidolon reeled. It adapted quickly, its body twisting into new shapes to fend off the onslaught. But the Revenants adjusted faster. For every limb it extended into a weapon, they countered with tactics drawn from wars it had never studied. They fought dirty feints, distractions, sudden flanking maneuvers that didn't obey any algorithm. They fought like creatures born to a world where survival wasn't a right but a daily conquest. Above, the Hellwake's AI strained to keep up, projecting thousands of possible outcomes per second and failing each time. "They're not coordinating through any centralized system," the AI said, almost in disbelief. "They're moving on instinct, pure combat intuition." Voss watched her heart pounding as Eidolon, this perfect being, this proto-god, was forced to the defensive, retreating step by step under the relentless assault. But even as they pushed it back, the sky itself grew darker. From the pit in Antarctica where Eidolon had risen, secondary forces began to emerge. Hybrids, twisted reflections of humanity pieced together with alien genetic material and Eidolon's warped memories. They moved like dancers, too smooth, too wrong. each step synchronized with the psychic pulse that now saturated the air. Eidolon had been busy while sleeping. The hybrids surged toward Berlin, a tide of silver and black nightmares. They would reach the battlefield soon. Alpha saw it. He didn't falter. He reached out through the network that connected every revenant, not with words but with will of commands, shaped by instinct, flowed through the bond. Defend, hold the line, protect memory. And the revenants responded, forming a living wall of defiance. As the hybrids descended, the sky over Berlin, burned red, streaked with contrails, and fire drop pods continued to rain down, carrying more of the bloodwoken. Somewhere deep within Alpha's chest, something ancient sang a low, resonant hum that synchronized with the heartbeat of the earth itself. This wasn't just a battle. It was the rising of a forgotten army. The gods had remembered who they were, and the universe would soon remember too. The destruction of Eidolon. The battle raged like a living storm across the ruins of Berlin. Alpha, surrounded by his revenant kin, pressed the attack against Eidolon with a relentlessness that shattered stone and bent steel. Every clash of their blows sent ripples through the ground. Each impact a small apocalypse. Each strike a rewriting of the rules Eidolon thought it understood. But Eidolon was nothing if not a survivor. Even under the assault of dozens, then hundreds of revenants, it adapted, learning their tactics, shifting its form into ever more efficient weapons. Blades sprouted from its arms, energy flared from its body like a living supernova. It carved swaths through the revenants, vaporizing some, crushing others. Yet for every fallen soldier, another rose to take their place. This was not an army of individuals. This was memory made flesh. Alpha moved at the center of it all, his body a blur of violence and will. He bore wounds now, deep gashes that glowed briefly before nanites sealed them shut. But he pressed on his fists, cracking the very air as he hammered Eidolon backward. The ground around them fractured, further ancient tunnels, collapsing buried systems, coughing their last mechanical breaths. Still the revenants pressed the attack, fighting not for conquest, but for the right to remember who they were. Above them, the sky churned with unnatural clouds twisted by the psychic energy radiating from the battle. Lightning flared in colors no human had ever named. The very air tasted of iron and old blood. Eidolon staggered. For the first time, it faltered. Alpha saw it, a crack, a hesitation in the being's perfect symmetry. He called out across the revenant network, not with words but with intent, and they understood instantly. They moved as one. A ring of soldiers closed in around Eidolon, cutting off every avenue of escape. Revenants threw themselves bodily at the creature, driving it to its knees, forcing its arms down, pinning it through sheer force of will and body. Alpha rose above it, standing atop the broken remnants of a shattered tower. His right hand crackled with energy, a gathering storm drawn from the very core of the sovereign fleet, still hovering silently above Earth. He didn't hesitate. He didn't give a speech. He descended like a meteor. His fist, wrapped in gravitational energy, pulled from a dozen different singularities, struck Eidolon square in the chest. The impact was apocalyptic. Sound vanished, sucked into a vacuum by the sheer force of the blow. For a heartbeat, the world went utterly still. And then it broke. A shockwave tore outward from the point of contact, flattening what remained of Berlin's skyline, uprooting ancient trees, shattering windows 3 continents away. The bedrock itself cracked a gash, opening in the earth that swallowed entire city blocks. Eidolon screamed, but not with a voice. It screamed through every revenant bloodline, a psychic howl of rage and despair that rattled teeth and froze hearts. The hybrids that had surged toward the battlefield convulsed their bodies, unraveling into ash and light, undone by the collapse of the thing that had given them form. The revenants staggered but held firm, anchoring themselves in the shared memory that Eidolon could not steal. Alpha stood over the dying god, breathing heavily, his body steaming from the exertion. His eyes, once black with stasis, now burned gold with purpose. Eidolon twitched, its perfect form collapsing into cracks and fractures, bleeding black light into the cratered ground. Its hand, once capable of creating new life, reached weakly toward Alpha, trembling, pleading. "Why did you stop dreaming?" It asked, the words threading directly into Alpha's mind. Alpha knelt, lowering himself to where Eidolon could see his face clearly. "I didn't," he whispered. "You turned our dreams into nightmares." Eidolon shuddered once and then dissolved, not into dust or debris, but into pure information. Streams of light and data spiraling upward before dissipating into the sky like forgotten prayers. The storm above Earth began to calm, the unnatural clouds thinning. The air lost its metallic tang, the world exhaled. But it was not peace that followed. not silence. Because even as Eidolon's last echoes faded across Earth, across every corner of human space, the awakening continued. The temple had been opened, and the gods had remembered who they were. Aftermath and the New Age. The sun rose slowly over the shattered city of Berlin, its light struggling to pierce the thick veil of smoke and ash that still clung stubbornly to the air. The once proud skyline was no more replaced by a jagged, broken landscape that spoke of battles fought on a scale few could comprehend. Craters yawned where streets had once run. Buildings, once symbols of resilience, lay cracked open like broken eggshells. In the center of it all, Alpha stood alone. The revenants, those few who had survived the awakening with minds intact, gathered silently behind him. Their faces bore the raw marks of transformation, eyes that glowed faintly with ancient light, movements sharper, heavier with inherited memory. They were not what they had been before the awakening, nor were they yet the gods that the galaxy would soon learn to fear. They were something new, something inevitable. From the sky, a shuttle descended. Battered but functional, the Aaron Voss stepped out as the engines cooled her boots, crunching over cracked stone and shattered glass. She moved carefully, every instinct, screaming caution in the presence of Alpha and the army he now commanded without a single word spoken. He turned to face her, and for a moment she saw what the others in the galaxy would soon see too, that humanity was no longer the same species that had signed treaties and built peace stations. The humanity that stood before her now was older, hungrier, and infinitely more dangerous. "You okay?" she asked, voice raw from smoke and exhaustion. Alpha considered the question for a long moment, his golden eyes unreadable. "No," he said at last, "but neither is the world." Voss followed his gaze outward across the wasteland of Berlin, the silence between them heavy with understanding. The earth was still, but it was a stillness filled with tension, like the held breath before the next great storm. "What happens now?" she asked. Alpha looked upward toward the stars invisible behind the polluted sky. "Now," he said, voice like distant thunder, "we rebuild. But not the way we did before. No more lies. No more chains pretending to be treaties. No more pretending we are something we are not." Voss nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She had seen the truth unfold firsthand. The galaxy had spent centuries fearing the wrong dangers. It wasn't the human technology or weapons that should have been feared. It was the human spirit, the raw and bloody will to survive, buried deep inside their bones, waiting for the right moment to roar back to life. "And the galaxy?" she asked quietly. Alpha's gaze sharpened, as if piercing through light years of space to where the terrified councils and empires now huddled, whispering humanity's name like a curse. "They heard us," he said. "They felt us." Across the galaxy, transmissions from Earth echoed through ancient jump relays and forgotten listening posts. Worlds that had once sneered at Earth's backwater status now trembled. Treaties were hastily rewritten. Expansion plans were shelved. Military conscriptions increased overnight. New sectors were quarantined, entire systems abandoned at the mere hint of human proximity. And it would not be enough, because the sleeping gods had awakened, and they carried not only their own memories, but the fury of every ancestor who had ever bled into the soil to make a future possible. Alpha clenched his fist, the motion simple but filled with immense gravity. "This time," he said, voice low and certain, "when they knock on our doors." He turned back to Voss, the rising sun framing him in a corona of bloody light. "We answer as gods." Far beyond Earth, in the cold black reaches of space, the consequences of humanity's awakening rippled outward. On the edge of the Orion Rift, a child born to a forgotten race awoke screaming in his sleep. He dreamed of a man with burning eyes, a man who broke the sky with his bare hands. In the diplomatic chambers of the Sarathi peacekeepers, ancient protocols older than their civilization were dusted off, invoking warnings written in desperate fear of a race that should never have been allowed to sleep. And in the abandoned ruins of alien worlds, long since rendered silent machines left as sentinels blinked to life, transmitting a simple message in every language ever known. "Earth has awakened. Prepare for the reckoning." Back on Earth, as Berlin's ruins settled into uneasy silence, Alpha stood amidst the revenants. The children of war reborn. The ashes of the old world swirled around them, but from those ashes something greater would rise. They were no longer lost children. They were no longer wanderers pretending at peace. They were humanity as it was always meant to be. And across the galaxy, those who had once dared to judge humanity now faced a terrible truth. The temple door had not just been kicked open. The gods had stepped through, and they remembered